Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Atherton. I'm a master's degree student at the University of Arizona Global Campus, and I'm excited to be presenting today as this topic hits home in a powerful way. Not only do I desire that everyone can grasp the neurological, psychological, and physiological elements bipolar presents, but as someone who was diagnosed with bipolar several years ago, I desire that others understand how it affects individuals in a personal way and how clinicians can better assist those in need moving forward. Understanding how the brain works is important, but understanding how it works in the context of an individual dealing with a disorder is even more important when treating patients. One of these disorders vital to understand would be that of bipolar disorder. In 2017, the National Institute for Mental Health estimated that there were over 6 million people diagnosed with bipolar disorder. As a mental health professional, I believe this number should evoke two things. First, it should evoke the realization that at some point, every person working in the mental health field will encounter an individual with this disorder. Secondly, it should evoke the desire to understand how this disorder functions, not just on the surface, but physiologically and neurologically as well. For those who have already worked with patients having the diagnosis of bipolar, several things can reveal themselves from initial conversation with the patient. There is emotional and behavioral instability. There are unexplainable highs and lows that, when unchecked, can escalate into extreme manic states, depending on the diagnosis of bipolar of 1 or 2, which we will discuss further here shortly. Even though seemingly easy to navigate on the surface with medications or behavioral therapies, if there's a lack of understanding of how the brain functions within this disorder, a proper understanding of helping individuals work through it will be lost. This presentation will take the time to process three vital areas of the brain structure and how they are affected by bipolar disorder, desiring to bring awareness to the reality of the effects of bipolar and how to work through these effects with patients understanding the areas affected. One area to work through before the breakdown of the disorder itself would be understanding its origins. In a quote by Arisoy in 2009, they say, bipolar disorder is a severe mental illness that afflicts approximately 1% of the world's population and is characterized by mood swings from elation to depression. Although the etiology of bipolar disorder remains unclear, heritable factors are involved. Family, twin, and adoption studies suggest a genetic etiology. Molecular genetic studies also support a genetic component. These molecular genetic studies have implicated many chromosomal regions, but no single susceptibility gene has been identified. These findings show that bipolar disorder has a complex genetic etiology in which multiple unidentified genes and environmental factors play an important role in its pathogenesis. One thing that needs to be pointed out here is that there are definitive genetic connections regarding the disorder. However, there's not a full certainty of the specific genes affected, bringing out the reality that even though much is known, there is still much that is not understood and much that is just simply being guessed in this process. This brings the reality to the surface that even at the best guess, there may be elements to a specific patient that can never be fully understood, with a more profound push to desire to help instead of simply just fix. As the discussion of bipolar disorder started, the first thing that we should be evaluating would be how this affects the patients who will be walking through the door. As seen previously, bipolar is extremely prevalent and will most likely be presented in any clinical setting. This said, there needs to be an understanding of the different types of bipolar that may present themselves, as discussed previously, and how the clinician can identify the different symptoms associated. Within bipolar disorder, two prominent types are displayed a majority of the time, that being bipolar 1 and bipolar disorder 2, or BD1 and BD2. BD1 presents itself in patients with the main symptom of having a full manic episode, while BD2 presents itself in hypomanic episodes. Understanding these basic structures and symptoms of BD is important, but most importantly, there needs to be an understanding of how these different symptoms affect the individual being discussed. As an individual charged with caring for others, a deep understanding of what is felt, even empathy, is necessary to assist best. Therefore, throughout this seminar, each neurological discussion will conclude with how it affects the individuals directly, not only to understand the psychological and physiological issues presented, but to better have an empathetic understanding. So in this next section of the seminar, we'll be breaking down 3 vital brain structures that BD affects. The 3 observed structures that we'll be looking through are the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala. From the review of these structures, there's a desire that there would be a deeper understanding of their functionality, but again, how these structures are affected and how the individual working through the disorder is affected in their everyday lives, bringing out the best treatment options available. While several individual structures are affected by bipolar disorder, there's a much larger scale that's affected in the brain by this disorder, the limbic system, which should be evaluated before individual aspects of the brain are processed. The limbic system is involved in behavior and emotional responses in individuals. Research has revealed that the limbic system, specifically regions like the amygdala and the hippocampus, are affected by bipolar disorder, showing structural changes and abnormal activity, leading to dysregulated emotional processing and the mood swings characteristic of those with this disorder. 2 of the main symptoms associated with the limbic system in the context of bipolar would be that of mania and depression. When the limbic system is excessively activated, it creates heightened emotional responses and behavioral shifts, sometimes even euphoria, contributing to the state known as mania. Mania can be categorized in several ways, but according to the Bipolarity Index, it can be seen through a very specific lens. Mania at its core is a state of abnormally elevated mood, energy, and activity that lasts at least 1 week, where impulsivity, irritability, excessive energy, lack of desire to sleep, and a sense of grandiosity are at the core. On the other end of the spectrum, when there's a lack of activity in the limbic system, it creates a state of depression and emotional instability, showing clearly how the ups and downs of bipolar are so prevalent in the patients as the limbic system is overactive and underactive. Understanding the limbic system and its functionality is vital while working with individuals with this disorder. From the breakdown of the system, most of the brain regarding emotions and behavior is affected, and therefore can create a very trying and frustrating time for the individual and those interacting with the individual. With this understanding, there should be an elevated desire to diagnose and properly medicate quickly to alleviate the symptoms that are bound to arise within this disorder. Within the context of diagnosis and the function of the limbic system, must be noted that there are 2 specific diagnoses of bipolar, as we spoke of previously, bipolar 1, bipolar 2, with more of a contextual understanding from the previous conversation. We can see through our discussion in mania, bipolar 1 is defined as having a minimum of 1 manic episode, while bipolar 2 is associated with hypomanic episodes, which are more subdued than manic episodes. Different aspects and traits make each human unique when thinking of individuals and their personalities. The area of the brain that creates this individuality in moment-to-moment processing is the prefrontal cortex, also known as the personality center. The prefrontal cortex is a brain region in the frontal lobe before the motor cortex. It's responsible for various cognitive functions, specifically the personality center. Understanding what the prefrontal cortex is, there can be a decent assumption that bipolar disorder would influence this area, considering the symptoms associated. Throughout several post-mortem studies over the years, it's been proven that in bipolar disorder, structural brain abnormalities in the prefrontal cortex occur. Throughout these studies, it was noted that individuals diagnosed with bipolar disorder had a reduced volume of gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, which affects functional brain activity in the area. Several other areas are affected, which can then affect the patient's daily functioning. In several studies, it was shown through neural imaging that in bipolar patients, there is a decrease in volume in the prefrontal cortex, more specifically, the medial prefrontal cortex, or the MPFC. There was also proof of neuronal size shift and changes in neuronal density. Next significant findings were reduction in glial cell density and lastly, changes in gene expression. As the structures observed, there's a direct connection between bipolar disorder and the prefrontal cortex. Having a grasp on this structure and the effects of bipolar can be very helpful in the diagnosis process. Knowing that the prefrontal cortex is associated with personality, one of the main attributes associated with bipolar disorder is personality shift due to behavioral ups and downs that occur. When the physiology of the brain is examined, seeing that there is a clear deficiency in the gray matter, neuron size and density, and size shift in glial cells. The most drastic would be changes in gene expressions where functional brain activity is affected, including mood swings, cognitive impairments, and energy level elevations and decreases. From this, there's a clear connection between the physiological, psychological, and neurological change within this disorder. Another area of the brain that must be discussed when breaking down the effects of bipolar disorder is also in the limbic system, which is called the amygdala. The amygdala is a small almond-shaped structure in the brain's medial temporal lobe. The structure involves memory, emotion, and motivation. The amygdala is one of the main structures affected by the disorder, as it is the key part of the brain that processes emotions. A main problem seen in research is that there's a deficiency in the amygdala in bipolar patients. In the research, it is shown that at times there's hyperactivity in either the prefrontal cortex or the amygdala that can lead to mania and depression, as seen previously working through the other structures. The amygdala plays a large role in connecting emotions to the perceived world and even cognitive functions. When there's an understanding of how the brain is affected by bipolar disorder, a pattern can be seen that connects the amygdala and the limbic system as a whole with the emotional state that the patient is in. So often with individuals struggling with bipolar, there can be a lack of understanding, believing it's only to be emotional highs and lows. Still, from the provided research, it's clear that it is much more in-depth than previously thought. The deficiencies or even hyperactivity discovered in the amygdala show how this disorder disrupts the emotional stability of an individual due to brain functioning. The first step in helping a patient within the context of this disorder is to understand how the brain functions. Due to the varying symptoms associated with BD, it's important to understand the treatment options available to assist patients. Some of the most practical treatment options can be through different forms of therapy. One of the most highly regarded forms of therapy for BD would be that of CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. In this therapy, the patient is assisted by reorienting thought processes and shifting behavioral patterns during this time frame. The other treatments that are usually necessary from this diagnosis would be medication. Most of the time, mood stabilizers would be the most helpful, but in other cases, it might be appropriate to prescribe antipsychotics or antidepressants. In conclusion, as we walk through this presentation, we took time to process 3 vital areas of the brain. We saw the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala. And through this presentation, it was revealed how these areas are affected by bipolar disorder, which helped bring awareness to the reality of the effects of BD and how to work through these effects with patients. As a mental health professional, it's vital to understand the emotions and behavior of a patient, to understand how the brain structures are affected, and more importantly, how you can best assist them to live their best life possible.